Joel Hunt is a versatile instrumental artist and composer and educator with a strong focus on electric guitar. He's gained recognition for his unique approach to modern instrumental music, which spans across multiple genres. His music takes listeners on a sonic and visual journey. Throughout his career, Joel has collaborated with other artists, including Lincoln Brewster, Jordan Lawler, Mark Lettieri, Justin Stanton, Norm Stockton, Zorro, Corey Wong, and many more. Joel is based in Queensland, Australia, and has toured and performed with many high-level artists such as Mick Lindsay, Mark Schultes, Sarah Storer, Brendan Walmsley, and more. Joel, you've written an intro to the album. What was the point of doing that?
So the intro is there to establish a vibe, to kind of communicate what's to come in the album and to kind of let the audience in on what to expect, I suppose.
Now, obviously, the album's very much guitar-driven. That's your genre, your background that you like playing. What are the genres that you sort of cover in the album?
Yeah, well, the idea was to bring the electric guitar into a modern context. I listen to a lot of music that has a lot of genres encompassed in it. So rock, funk, fusion, electronic, ambient, orchestral, all covered in this album. And also I love instrumental music that it doesn't tell the listener what to think, but it takes them on a journey.
Joel, you had Justin Stanton produce this track for you. What was that like?
Yeah, amazing. So he is, for people that don't know, he is the one of the synth and horn players in Snarky Puppy.
Yep.
And I met him through Mark Lettieri. We'll probably talk about that in another track to come. But yeah, getting connected with him was awesome. And we also got the drummer from Snarky Puppy. His name's Jason Thomas, and he played drums on this track. And yeah, working with those two guys was incredible. They were very good at what they do. And his direction was really clear as well, Justin as a producer.
Well, I wanted to talk about that a bit. Like having a producer is someone kind of standing over you in a sense and going, I think you should do this, I think you should do this. Where do you find that midpoint between them saying do this and you going, no, it's my music?
Yeah. Well, it's definitely, I think it's give and take. So I think in the end, as the generally they will say what they heavily think we should do, but me as the artist does have the final say.
Yeah.
But there is definitely times where it's like, okay, I just need to defer to them. And there's times where it's like, no, I'm pretty certain that I don't want it to go in this direction. So compromise is a big part of it too. And often, if you're doing that well, that's usually when you get the best product.
Yep. Well, let's have a chat about the song, Statik. What's the context? Where did it come from?
Yeah, it comes from the chords. So the chords are very static. It's kind of like a pop song in the fact that the chords are the same from start to end.
Right.
The thing that changes around it is the melody, the counter melodies, and the feel. So I kind of wanted to approach this like a pop song, although it is got a lot of electronic and rock elements in it as well.
So you talked about the chord structure. What key have you written it in?
It's in the key of, I guess you could, to keep it simple, E major,
Right.
But there is actually no E major in this song. So A sus add 11, B add 11, C sharp minor 9 are the chords that basically repeat all the way through.
Yeah. And as a guitarist, geek us out a bit here on those chord structures.
Sure. Well, they're actually really simple chords to play, and really the only thing that's changing is you're holding this chord and the bass note underneath is changing it. So while those chords sound complicated, to play it is actually not that hard.
They're not too bad. Talk a bit about the tones that you created on this track.
Yeah, so I'm a big sucker for the Marshall Plexi. That's my favorite amp sound with just about any guitar. But yeah, I've got a Lincoln Brewster signature Stratocaster and a Highway 1 Telecaster, and I was running that through a lot of the neural equipment and kind of producing Plexi sounds with that gear.
And the synth sounds?
We're using mostly Omnisphere, a little bit of Serum and native plugins as well. But basically a lot of the sound is an envelope filter that's sort of quickly opening and closing, and that's kind of the development and pulsating sound of the synthesizers.
I guess most people who write music are going to have something in their mind, another artist or another song or whatever. Was there something around that for you, for this particular track?
Yeah, there was sort of 3 tracks that this kind of culminated from. So there's a song by a Zed called Candyman, Think About You by Cody Fry, and a Lincoln Brewster piece called Live to Praise You. And they're kind of this mixture of pop, electronic, and rock, with the guitar being the focus.
Joel, you had Mark Lettieri produce this album. That must have been pretty cool.
Yeah, so he is the guitarist from Snarky Puppy, The Fearless Flies. He's got his own solo project, and he's amazing at what he does. So getting to work with him was incredible, and he was actually the guy that got this album project started. So I emailed a bunch of demos out to a bunch of my heroes, and his manager got back to me and said, he digs your stuff, he's on tour, but he'll be back in a week, and
Wow.
he's interested to get started. So we started talking about over Zoom about doing a couple of tracks, and then it kind of went from there when I met some of his other bandmates as well.
What's the context of this particular song? The whole album is about space, and this is universes. I'm guessing it's kind of all linked in there somehow.
Yeah, this one is very heavily linked, which is why it's right towards the start, I think. So this song is literally taking the listener on a journey through different universes. That's kind of was my idea behind this track, and so there's a lot of different musical things happening throughout this song. We've got different sounds, different vibes. We've got meter changes. The bridge jumps all over the place with different modes and modulations for a lot of movement.
Let's just focus in on the meter changes for a bit there. What have you done, and how's that sort of fit in with the different universes that you're talking about?
Yeah, so the intro and the verses are in 7/4.
Right.
So groups of 3 and 4 instead of just 1, 2, 3, 4. So it kind of catches you off guard a little bit, but there's actually a lot of music that is written in 7/4. It's not super innovative, but it's something that I hadn't done a lot of, so it was a lot of fun to start with that. And then the choruses and the solos and the bridge, that's all 4/4, but it kind of jumps around.
What about others that kind of helped out with the process on this song? You had a few people in alongside and collabing with you?
Yeah, so Mark was the producer. I played all the guitars on this track. I composed this track and did the string arrangement. We had Jason Thomas play drums. Norm Stockton, who's the bass player for Lincoln Brewster, he played bass, and he's a friend of Mark's, and we'll talk more about that in Edge of Reality as to how I met him. And then also I had a connection when I was working on the solo and the bridge section. I happened to meet over Zoom Mark Lee, who's the guitarist from Third Day, and he kind of gave me a little bit of direction with the guitar solo and where to take the song and that kind of thing, and that was really cool too.
Let's have a chat about that whole development process, because you would have had a concept, like a demo sort of idea. How did that shift from the demo that you had to the final product that we hear on the album?
Yeah, so there's definitely tracks on the album where they have shifted like significantly, but this is probably not one of them. This one is pretty much how I wrote it. We just got really solid players to play on it instead of me programming drums and bass and that kind of thing. Yeah.
You got strings on this track. What was it like for you writing for strings?
It's a newer concept to me. It's something I've only been learning in the last few years, but I found the trick for me is starting with just creating the basic chords, and then you add the rhythms, the extensions, the motifs from there and have it fit around. So starting with the basics and then making it more interesting.
So the bridge is a bit special in this one too. I know you talked to me before about it's one of your favourite moments.
Yeah, it's one of my favourite solos I think I've ever written, and having Mark from Third Day kind of give some direction on that was really cool as well.
So what sort of direction? Like, again, how does that kind of influence you?
Yeah, he's not exactly like telling me what to play or anything like that, but he's like, put it like right at the end. That big bend at the end was a suggestion. I originally didn't have that. I had it down the octave, and so he's like, hey, you should finish on a big crescendo with this big high note. So it was things like that, giving direction around where do I go from there, and telling that story on the guitar.
Yeah.
Norm's unison harmony at the end of that bridge solo, where we all play the same thing, but he plays the harmony of it on the bass. That was incredible. That was probably one of my favorite moments on that track.
Now, you weren't playing at the same time, were you? Or it was?
No, so
You were layering.
That's right. So we're adding layers, and he came in at the end and added the bass track over the top of what we'd recorded.
Is there any footage of you playing this?
There is some footage of me playing this solo. It's on my YouTube and Instagram channel.
All right, geek us out on the guitars.
Yes.
What did you play?
The main tones with this one is a Les Paul, so that's my kind of heavier sounding guitar through a heavier sounding amp, which is a JCM 900, which is a little bit of a heavier Marshall amp, and then the supporting guitars, the Strats and Tellys are all plexi sounds that they're going through.
Who produced this track, Simply?
So this was another one I did with Justin. This was actually the first one I did with Justin when we got connected through Mark. He did a lot of the production work on this track with me, and between the two of us, we covered this together. What
about the context?
Yeah, this one started with a drum synth bass and sample idea that I had on my computer. It was a cool thing, but I didn't think I was going to finish it or do anything with it. And my wife happened to be walking past and said, "Hey, that's cool." And I sort of said, "I don't think I'm going to finish it, but it's just to have a bit of muck around." She's like, "No, you should finish that one."
Right.
It's the only time she's ever said that to me too. But I'm really glad she did, because I'm really happy with the product of this song. But also, I think that's a good metaphor for how marriage works, right? Like that they challenge you in areas that you don't necessarily think are of value, or and it ends up being of a lot of value.
Yeah, love it. So you did listen to your wife. How much did the demo change to what you've ended up on the album when you listened to her?
Well, the demo changed in that I actually wrote some guitar parts around it. It was sort of just like an idea inside the box, but then it became, okay, let's give it a go with the guitar and add some chords to it and add a bit of a melody as well. And then Justin took it and made it even better, I think, and added more textures and color to it as well.
You've spoken about genres. There's a whole bunch of different genres on the album. What about genres on this particular track?
Yeah, this one's a mixture of electronic, jazz, and sort of lo-fi. It's probably, I'd describe it as sort of a chill vibe with this one, but there's a lot of jazz techniques going on subtly behind the scenes as well. So you've got a lot of seventh chords, extensions of those seventh chords. So that plays a big part in the jazz side of things, but it's also why it feels so smooth as well, is that use of the seventh chords, the sus chords. There is a dominant 7 sus chord in there too, but most of it is major and minor 7 chords.
So what are the guitars that you used?
So the lead on this one is a Strat through a Plexi sound through the neural quad cortex, and the Telly is a similar sound, but it's playing the rhythm part. And there is a video of me playing this on Instagram and YouTube.
Now, you said this was produced, obviously, but you had a bit of a role to play in producing this as well, right?
Yeah, so one thing I was really happy with was just what originated in the original demo was I took some samples off a Roland, I think it's called a Roland SPX30 drum pad. I borrowed one and got all the sounds off it and pitch shifted and slowed down this like kind of warping sound. And I took that and put it in the key of the song and then played around with it in terms of the vibe. And you hear it, Justin brings it in towards the end, and it's a really neat addition towards the end of the track.
This track, The Space Between the Stars, it was produced by Justin as well.
Yes, this was one that I wrote, and it stays fairly true to what I originally had. However, he kind of took the melody of the chorus and kind of expanded on it as the producer, and I think that was a good call, because I think in the end it makes the chorus even catchier, I think. So yeah, Justin did a lot of the synth work. We got JT on drums again from Snarky. I had a mate of mine, Tim Hackle, also play some guitars on this one as well with me, and then I sort of took care of the composition, the guitars and the synths.
Talk to me about the title, The Space Between the Stars. What was the point there?
Yeah, this one was influenced by a really specific artist by the name of Adam Young. A lot of people know him for his work with Owl City, but I love a lot of his instrumental stuff, and a lot of people know, in Australia probably don't know, that he does a lot of instrumental work as well. And so he did an album under his own name, Adam Young, called Voyager 1, and there's a track on that album, I think it's the last track on that album, called Interstellar Space. And I guess this was a nod to that, because there's a line in that talks, it's literally called this, where he literally says the space between the stars. So there was a bit of a nod to that, but also capturing the sound of that album was a space album that told a story about a space probe. I wanted to kind of encapsulate that in this particular track. Also, he has another project called Color Therapy, and some of the sounds that I was going for were also influenced by that particular album. So Adam Young had a lot to do with this track. And then I suppose in terms of the mixing side of things, lots of reverbs and delays, there's probably an influence by a band called M83, which I've been actually, since this album, I've been lucky enough to work with one of the guys from this band.
All right, so talk about the guitars and the synths and all the things that you use to create the incredible sounds.
Yeah, again, no surprises, a Plexi sound with the neural gear. And then my Strat is kind of the main, it's the Lincoln Brewster Strat, is the main rhythmic side of things and plays a lot of the chords and arpeggiations and that kind of thing. And then the solo at the end is a Les Paul through a Plexi sound. Tim actually played a Gretsch on this album, on this track, and it's a really good addition. It kind of sits in with the mix a lot around the Strat, has a different thing but complements it really nicely, and then he played the harmony part in the solo as well on his Les Paul.
So when you talk about all of these guitars and complementing each other, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think it just comes down to that they sit in their own space but also make sense together, I guess, in a nutshell. So I reamped a lot of Tim's sounds through Corey Wong's Neural plugin, and that kind of had a brighter kind of sound, and then I got the warmth from my Neural Quad Cortex.
The synth sounds?
The one that unlocked it for me was this preset on Omnisphere called Chaos Celeste, and it's kind of this motif that you hear all the way through the verses, and the chorus kind of expands on it. When I kind of found that sound and came up with that motif, it just kind of unlocked the track for me. As soon as I wrote that motif, I was like, all right, I know where I'm going with this, and basically wrote the track in a day.
Joel, in this particular track, there's some really key musical features and motifs and stuff. How did you put all that together?
Yeah, so this one's built off loops. Like some of the other tracks, the intro simply they're built off loops and bringing layers in and out. Same with this one. For interest towards the end, there's a key change that leads into the solo, but also how I got there to that key change was a bit different to normal. So I use a drum fill, and then the tracks then come in on beat 3 as an accent. So playing around with a key change that wasn't actually being led by the chords a bit, but being led by a drum fill, and then bang, you're into the solo and the new chords.
What do you want to achieve when you choose to put a key change in?
With this particular song, it was to make the solo at the end stick out. Yeah. So it was to make it the climax, it was to take it to the next level and to let listeners know that, hey, this is the pinnacle of the song.
You had Norm Stockton produce this, but you've got some very cool stories about connecting with Norm and with Lincoln Brewster, who's one of your all-time heroes.
Yeah, so getting connected with Norm was through Mark Lettieri. When we came to get a bass player for Universes, I found out that Mark had played on some stuff of Norm's, and I asked the question, would he be keen to play? And he said yes, and that was amazing. So he did an incredible job on Universes, but I approached him after and just said thank you for playing, and I'm a huge fan of you and your work and playing with Lincoln, and you've literally played on my favorite album of all time, which was Today Is the Day by Lincoln. And and then I asked the question after we kind of chatted a few times, would he be interested in producing a track that I was writing something at the time, and sort of thought this could be cool if Norm kind of brought his fusion aspect to it. Really happy with how this track turned out, but Norm produced this in a really cool way and pushed me in a lot of areas that I had not done before.
Lincoln Brewster plays on this track. Now, he's been your hero forever, right? And probably a lot of your early guitar playing was modelled on him.
Yes, definitely. It was very surreal. I never thought I'd ever get to do something like that. Not only did he play, but we got to do some guitar tones, and we hung out for a bunch of time, which was really cool. We also got Lincoln's drummer to play on this, and Rob Brinderer, who's a mate of Norm's, who's an incredible keys player. There's a bit of a story getting connected with Lincoln was that we were waiting to hear from him if he was available to play by a certain date, and on that date we still hadn't heard anything. So I messaged Norm and just said, hey, haven't heard anything, what should we do? And he just sent me Lincoln's phone number and said give him a call, and with little context I was a bit nervous and thought I'd have to apologise for having his phone number, probably explain who the heck I was. Anyway, so I trusted Norm because I knew that they were friends, and I just dialed it, and Lincoln picked up after 2 rings and said, hey, this must be Joel, and then proceeded to tell me that he knew who I was through some of the stuff I'd done online, and that just blew my mind and really had to hold it together. So the next day we started doing some tone stuff together over Zoom, and we were running my guitar recordings through his amps, and then he was sending them back to me. And yeah, that was just awesome to run my guitars through his sounds and gear, and then just nerd out on guitar gear while we were waiting for things to render and that sort of thing as well.
You've called the song Edge of Reality. What's the background behind the title?
Yeah, so there's 3 parts to this. So I think we were working on the album cover at the time. I was physically designing that with Bob Headland, who's the album design guy for Mark Lettieri. He was designing my album cover at the time, and this is sort of the image that was in my head while I was doing that. The unison lines and the bridge section, any of Norm's heavy fusion influence kind of feels like it leaves reality, I think, as well. And then just the fact that I was working with my idols, that felt like a surreal experience, yeah.
What about the guitar tones on this track?
Yeah, so I originally had a similar setup to Universes. So Les Paul is the main one, strapped through a plexi for the backup ear. And then meeting with Lincoln, we kept some of that. And then the rest of it, we kind of re-amped through his amp. So the main lead ended up being through a 2-rock Bloomfield, which is basically 2-rock's version of the Marshall Plexi. And then a lot of the rhythm tracks, we kind of ran them through his Marshall Plexis, and that's a big part of the sound. And then his particular guitar sound was his signature guitar, but he had modified it and put an Eddie Van Halen humbucker in it, and I'm pretty sure he was playing it through a Marshall Plexi.
You and Norm played around with a bunch of key musical features in there. How did that sort of work together?
Yeah, so I approached it from a Mixolydian side, which is what a lot of rock music tends to be. And then he kind of approached his unison lines and the bridge through the melodic minor scale. There's some chromaticism in there as well, and in the bridge, he kind of approaches it from the third degree of the melodic minor scale, so being an augmented major 7. And then kind of there is some natural minor in there as well. Kind of it approaches the natural minor and melodic minor throughout, and then is anchored through the Mixolydian scale.
As an early guitarist, you kind of modelled yourself a fair bit on Lincoln's style, right?
Definitely, and it was definitely in my mind while I was writing and playing, especially the solos and that kind of thing on this track, to not be ripping him off, you know, to be playing something that nods to him, but also is my own thing, because I was very nervous that I was going to just rip him off and have him be like, come on, guy, come up with a real idea, you know, like, don't just rip me off all the time. But no, I think in looking back, I did that all right.
Where did the influence come from for this particular track?
This particular track is influenced by 3 places, I think. M83 is probably the main influence. Muse is another one, and Lincoln Brewster.
There's a lot of imagery in everything that you write on this album. Where did the imagery for this particular track come from?
Yeah, when I was writing this track, I started with some basic synthesizer sounds that were arpeggiations and opening filters of saw wave sounds on Omnisphere, and then from there I started getting the imagery of a solar eclipse, and then that kind of guided where the track went from there, and then the way I played the guitar and the way I built the drums around it.
So talk about the guitar.
Yeah, so this guitar that I played on it is actually quite a cheap guitar. It's not actually that expensive. It's about $600, and it's a Squier Deluxe Telly. But it has Fender wide range pickups in it, which is the same humbuckers that the guy from Coldplay uses, Johnny Buckland. And it was a 21st birthday present. We happened to be down the coast with my parents, and Dad and I went to the guitar shop, and we both liked the sound of that guitar. And so he's like, "Oh, do you want this to be a 21st present?" I was like, "Heck yeah," because I didn't want to put it back. So that was that guitar, and I guess the approach of playing kind of came from Matt Bellamy from Muse, and the legato playing of Lincoln, I suppose, as well.
So what's the purpose of this track as a short transition track?
Yeah, well, it's to transition from the last song to the next song. So you've got the fusion influence of Norm's Edge of Reality, and then we're heading towards the next song that I produced, which was a more electronic influence. So this kind of bridged the gap between those 2 songs.
What was the big influence in this track?
The influence here was probably a mixture of Adam Young, Owl City, and Tycho. So this mixture of kind of electronic meets guitar.
You produced this one yourself?
I did, yeah. So this one, I did have help, but I did the overall producing and wrote the original idea with this track. I had a bit of help with a mate who took the chorus and kind of was playing around with some different drum beats around it and some different synth sounds. And once he did that, I was like, wow, that's cool. I know what we should do with this now. And then that's kind of what became. So it's sort of a second iteration of this idea.
Who did you pull in to play on this track?
So I played the small amount of guitar towards the end of the track. I did a lot of the synth and drum production to start with, and the finishing touches at the end. So a guy named Jai Witham, who was the one that came up with the chorus direction of this iteration, did a lot of the synth and drum work for the chorus with me, and we kind of collaborated on that. And then I also brought an ex-student and a friend of mine, Sammy Watts, in to do some synth and drum production towards the end.
Let's talk about mixing and mastering on the album. Let's start with mixing. Who did you get to mix this?
So Nick Hard, who is the mix engineer for Snarky Puppy and their albums, and he also mixes Justin's solo stuff as well.
So what is mixing? What did you learn about mixing when you went through this process?
I had a basic understanding of mixing. I could make stuff sound good, but he could make stuff sound incredible, and I think that's the big difference between a real mixing engineer and just someone who knows a little bit about it. And so a lot of it is to do with the right balance of EQ, reverb, a little bit of delay, but a lot of it is just balancing the track so that you're hearing the right sounds in the right way.
Do you ever get to the point where you're tweaking by like 0.5% and you think that's going to make all the difference, and yet no one's going to know it?
Yes, and the answer to that would be yes and no, because there's definitely times we were absolutely tweaking on that level with some stuff, and there was times where it's like, yeah, the average person wouldn't hear this, and then I think there would be times where if you A/B'd it for someone, they would be able to tell the difference. Would they be able to tell the difference while they're listening to it? I think they would be able to tell the difference between my mixing and Nick's, 100%. But yeah, I think a lot of the minute stuff is for the musicians that listen to music sometimes.
What about mastering?
Yeah, so mastering is an interesting process that happens right at the end. So it's about taking the mixed project and then making it smooth across all the way from start to finish. So it's making sure everything's consistent, basically, and it sounds good consistently on different devices. So a phone versus in your car versus on a professional sound system or whatever. So it's doing that final touch up of making everything consistent from intro to outro, basically.
That includes volume, but it's compressing and those sorts of things.
It is.
Well.
It's very minute stuff. So kind of like what we're talking with mixing is that the average person probably wouldn't notice it, but they would know one sounds better than the other.
Who did you get to master this?
Dave McNair, who is an incredible mastering engineer. I knew who he was through some stuff on YouTube, but he's a friend of Nick Hard's, and he has mastered for the biggest names on the planet, really, which is incredible. He masters for a lot of people, but some of the notable ones is David Bowie, Bob Dylan, Bruce Springsteen, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Miles Davis, Maroon 5, Switchfoot, and the list just goes on and on and on.
And Joel Hunt now.
The very least, right at the bottom is a footnote, yeah.
This track's got a bit of a film score sort of feel to it, and it's big, it's orchestral, you're playing guitar over it. There's a whole lot going on there.
Yeah, this was influenced by a lot of film composers, so Thomas Newman, Hans Zimmer, Brian Tyler. I also listened to music from, I mentioned Adam Young and Cody Fry as well, and they have a big influence of film score and orchestral music in their tracks as well. And I think the blend of those was kind of what I was thinking when I was writing this.
You've got orchestral samples in there. Let's have a chat about that.
Yeah, so orchestral samples allow you to program it all on the computer and not actually have anyone physically play it. And the samples are getting better and better. They sound better and more realistic the more time goes on. 20 years ago, they didn't sound very good, but now they sound pretty incredible, and I think they hold their own.
And a lot cheaper than hiring an orchestra.
A heck of a lot cheaper.
Would you have loved to have a live orchestra playing?
I would have. It would have been cool, but yeah, I think it would have been a lot of money.
Was there anything particularly musically interesting that you pulled into this track?
Yeah, so the climax is the bridge, and the bridge has a slightly darker feel to it, with the horns kind of taking the lead at times as well. But I used an E-flat chord that borrowed from the parallel minor scale, and that really helped it to take it in a slightly darker and different direction and make it more interesting, I think, too, in the bridge.
So who did you pull in on this particular track to help you out?
So Justin Stanton produced this one, oversaw this track. I composed it, and then we brought in, Justin had a friend named Jesse Hartov. Didn't know much about him, but he just recommended him, said he'd be able to make some tweaks here and there with my arrangement and then add some of his own samples to it as well, just to thicken it up in spots. And he did an incredible job, really made the horn section sound fantastic in the bridge, but didn't have a lot of context as to who he was, but just he did a great job.
it must have made a big difference having kind of a random come in, like Jesse, but he's done some incredible work.
Yeah, so I reached out to him at the end and said, thanks for what you've done. I love what you did. It sounds fantastic. Who are you and what do you do, basically? And he proceeded to tell me that he worked for one of the big film composers in America, a guy named Bear McCreary, who's done, like, people know him for The Walking Dead and a bunch of other movies and TV shows that he's done. And Jesse works with him. Jesse also does a bunch of stuff for Disney and Paramount and Apple TV. And just had an incredible resume.
Can we have a chat about the album cover and the logo that you got developed as well?
Yeah, so Mark Lettieri connected me with his designer, and his name is Bob Headland, and he worked with me on the album cover firstly. I had an idea of sort of like I knew the album was going to be called Space and Time, and had this idea of maybe a clock and the Earth or something like that in space kind of being combined together or something like that. That was sort of the imagery in my head, but he kind of had this idea. He did that, but then he also came back with some different drafts, and one of his ideas was basically very similar to what we ended up with, which was this sundial and then sort of a portal into space. And I think that was a cooler way of kind of presenting this idea of space and time. Yeah.
And then you got a logo designed for you as an artist.
That's right, yeah. So when we were designing the album cover, I felt that there was a little bit of empty space down the bottom so I sort of thought, well, I'm going to be designing a website and, need a logo for gear and for emails and that kind of thing too. So why don't we design a logo and put it down the bottom? And that's what we came up with, the pick with the JH in there. Who
produced this track, Fragments?
Justin Stanton also produced this one. He did a bit of work on the synth and drum samples in particular. We had Tim Hackoil, who played some guitars with me, and then I did a lot of the guitar and synth work.
All right, how about we have a bit of a chat about some of the features in this track?
Yeah, so this one, like some of the others, is an ostinato pattern of looping chords. The main motif is an ostinato pattern in itself as well. And the approach with this track is taking lots of simple parts and putting them together, and that creates more complexity. Bands that do that, Tycho, Coldplay, are some great examples of bands that take simple parts and add complexity through layering simple parts.
All right, guitar tones.
Yeah, so this one, I'm really happy with the guitar tone on especially the main motif. This is kind of 3 layers of kind of 3 of my favorite guitar sounds. So 5th position Strat pickup is one. Second one was the same thing, but the 4th position Strat pickup, and then same thing again on a middle position single coil tele, and the 3 of those kind of blended together and then panned out, kind of create this main motif sound. And then Tim's Gretsch was reamped through a Corey Wong plugin.
When you talk about panning out, help us understand what you mean there.
Yeah, so I kept one in the center, as in
audio center?
Yes, that's right. So audio center, I think the 5th position Strat was in the center, and then I kind of blended the 4th position to the left or the right, I can't remember, and then the opposite with the telly, and you kind of got this bigger sound that's kind of a mixture of all 3 when you do that.
And if you're listening on some really high quality headphones, you're going to hear the difference.
Yes, that's right.
Guitar solo in this one, mate.
Yeah, so I mentioned Coldplay doing simple stuff before, but effective, and that's kind of how I approached the guitar solo with this one. Instead of it being kind of shreddy and, telling a massive story with, lots of movement, this one was kind of taking just a couple of notes, and I think of like Coldplay Fix You, like that solo was literally 3 notes. It was kind of the approach that I was taking with this particular solo, and then Tim played some harmony notes as well towards the back half of the solo.
Who was involved in this track? I know Mark Lettieri did the production. Who else?
Yeah, so he brought in some of the players for his solo project, and some of them are in Snarky Puppy as well. But so we got JT on drums, Wes Stevenson on bass, who did some incredible slap bass on this track, and Justin Stanton, who this is where I met him. He actually came into play synths on this, and then I approached him about producing for the rest of the record.
So this was the first track that you recorded?
This was, yeah.
Yeah. So what did Mark bring to this particular track?
a lot. He played some guitars, added some layering with the electric guitar. He also played a baritone electric guitar, which is this guitar that kind of sits between the register of an electric guitar and an electric bass. He plays that guitar in the Fearless Flyers a lot. He picked the musicians for this track and picked them very well. He directed me with the form on this track. We changed it a bit from my demo. And then directed me with my solo playing. But probably the main thing that I really loved that he brought to this track was the reharmonization of the pre-chorus chords. So keeping the melody the same, but changing the chords underneath it. So I originally had a chord progression that was based in a lot of 7th chords. So the progression led F sharp minor 7, E, C sharp minor 7, F sharp dominant 7, and then very similarly again, and then concluding on a G sharp dominant 7 to get us back to the main motif. But he kind of took that, and that was pretty middle of the road what I'd created, and he kind of just brought a lot more interesting chords into it. The theory behind it is complex, but it doesn't sound complex, and I think that's a really clever thing, is that you take music theory, use it in a clever way that doesn't sound like it sounds mathematical. It just makes the music sound better, but it is complicated.
And this being the first track that you worked on, it must have been really good then to kind of frame everything else. You kind of knew what he would do in terms of being a producer and how he might push you.
That's right, yeah. So the reharmonization is a great example of that he took these 7th chords and turned them into quite a complex progression. So I think it follows A major 9, C sharp minor 7, B, F sharp over A sharp, and then D major 9, C sharp minor 7, A, B, which is far more complicated than what I had, but it just worked perfectly with the music and really helped bring out the bass in that section and help the melody shine at the same time, as well as sounding funky. I don't know how he did it, but he's amazing.
You got a bunch of people playing on this track, and obviously they all did that in their own studios. So talk about that remote recording process.
Yeah, so we approach it from a layering perspective. So one person would do something, then we get it back, we mix it, we send it off to the next person, and then we'd replace the demos with the real drums, the real bass. I was a bit nervous about how it was going to go with being a funky track that's all about time feel and having that centre around where we weren't in the same room together. But the players that these guys are just incredible, and honestly, that didn't even matter in the end. The time feel is spot on.
Do you reckon it would have been different if you had been in the room together?
I think I would have played a lot worse because I've been so nervous with all these other guys are just so incredible.
But it would have been an incredible process, right? To both ways, whether it was that you did this process you did, everyone in their own studios, or if you actually just played together.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think being the first track that we tracked on the album, that actually allowed me to go back and take my time with it and get it right, and then get a feel for how we were going to go about the album.
What's next for you? I know you've got an album that you're working on, your next album.
Yeah, I'm about maybe a third of the way through working on the second album at the moment. I've just finished a couple of tracks with Jordan Lawler. He's from a band called M83, who I've mentioned already in this interview. And to work with him has just been awesome, and to be connected with someone from a band that I'm a huge fan of has been awesome. But we just finished a couple of tracks, and they're due to be released in January 2024. I think the first single is going to come out on January 1, and the second will come out on January 22, I think.
On all the usual streaming platforms.
That's right, yeah. And then for the rest of the album, yeah, I'm writing, plenty of stuff myself, but I've also got some plans to bring some other players in, as I like to do. I've been in discussions with Mark Lettieri about bringing the Fearless Flyers in. So that's Corey Wong, Nate Smith, Joe Dart, and then Mark himself. And potentially getting some of the horn players with Justin, and maybe doing a funk track together where it's kind of a mixture of Fearless Flyers, myself, and some of the Snarky Puppy guys, which would be really cool. And I think that'll be something that'll be fun to track in.
Sounds like a brilliant collab.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that will come about, and that'll be really cool. I've started writing some ideas for that one at the moment, but still got plenty of work to do on that. And then I've got Norm lined up to do another track with him, and potentially bring in Laurie Basilio, who is one of my other favorite guitar players. She's a monster guitar player and kind of reminds me of Lincoln Brewster a little bit too.
Have you got a theme for the album?
Yes, at the moment it's going to be called Audio Visual, and again it kind of builds off this idea that I'm very much a visual learner and a visual person when I'm often writing music. So kind of playing off that. That's the idea at the moment.
Who produced this track, Stratosphere?
This is another one that Justin produced with me. He also played synths and keys on this. We brought JT in on drums again. Norm came in and played bass again, and then I composed the tune, played guitars, and helped with the synths as well.
So when you talk about you composed the tune, the melody of it, but did the others all bring in their own little bits and pieces to sort of create the total thing?
Yeah, so it was kind of a blend. So Justin kind of brought his melodic approach with the keys, which was great and exactly what I was looking for. JT and Norm were kind of working off the demo that I had sent, so they were kind of staying true to what I had done, but also bringing their own flavour to it.
So it's kind of this blend of you've got your concept, but they've brought a flavour rather than writing something specific.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. So what about the title, Stratosphere? Where does that come from?
The imagery is kind of, like the stratosphere above Earth is kind of what I was thinking of when I was thinking of writing it, but also kind of a bit of a play on words that it is this atmospheric tune and I'm playing a Fender Stratocaster known as the Strat. So it was kind of a play on words that's what I was thinking of while I was writing, but also physically what it was as well.
Yep. The dynamics of the track, how does that kind of morph around and how does it form in this particular track?
The dynamics and the form kind of build towards the climax, which is the solo right towards the end of the track. Yeah, I wanted it to be this track that kind of built and Justin's production direction and incredible piano playing and synth and pad sensibilities really helped kind of shape it towards that. And then it allows the solo towards the end to really shine as well and kind of makes the listener wait for it.
So where can people connect with your content?
I've got a website, it's joelhunt.com, that I designed with a mate of mine recently, and that's kind of the hub for everything that is to do with my music, and links to my Instagram and YouTube and Spotify and Apple Music can be found there as well. There's a bunch of videos and information about the project that we've talked about today as well there. Some people that I'd like to thank for their involvement in Space and Time is my friends and family, mum, dad, Gemma, my wife, Georgia, all the musicians, engineers and artists that were involved in helping this project be created, Jake Lotter, his videography and website development skills, Paul Fincher, his photography, and David Wilcox for this interview.
This is the outro now, but it's recorded differently from other tracks.
Yeah, so Justin and I jumped out on Zoom and actually recorded the guitar part to this using a program called Audio Movers within Logic, and then Justin then added the supporting pads and orchestral samples around the guitar. There was actually no click or set tempo for this one as well.
How did you approach the guitar tones in this one?
This one was slightly different. So again, I used my Lincoln Brewster Strat. I had it on the second position pickup, which has a different sound, but I didn't run it through my Quad Cortex. I ran it just straight into my interface and used Corey Wong's plugin, kind of going for an atmospheric plexi sound with that one. But when I was working with Lincoln on Edge of Reality and doing tones with him, I had been working on the guitar tone for this track and showed it to him, and he liked it so much that he asked me to send him the preset.
You can find more information about Joel Hunt at his website, joelhunt.com. Of course, you can find him on Spotify and Apple Music. Video content you can find at Joel Hunt Guitar on Instagram and YouTube. Don't forget there's new music coming in January 2024.